My name is Crystal Fryer. I'm 34 years old, and for a long time I truly believed that the worst chapter of my life had already ended sealed shut 5 years ago when my ex-husband walked away from our marriage without looking back. I told myself I had survived it, that I had healed, that whatever ghosts remained were harmless echoes, nothing more. I was wrong. Last Tuesday evening, as I stood in my kitchen debating whether to order Thai or pizza after a long day at work, the past didn't knock politely. It pounded. And when I opened my door, I came face to face with the very life I had worked so hard to rebuild myself from, standing there with a toddler on his hip and desperation written all over his face. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why that moment shattered me in ways I didn't expect, you need to know how it all began. 5 years ago, I was married to Daniel Fryer. We met when we were both 24, fresh out of college, exhausted but hopeful, clinging to the belief that love and hard work would be enough. I was starting my career in project coordination at a mid-size firm, while Daniel had landed an entry-level role in corporate sales. Nothing glamorous, just honest work and big dreams. We fell into each other quickly. Too quickly, some might say. Within a month, we were inseparable. Within 2 years, we were married in a modest outdoor ceremony that still managed to drain most of our savings. I didn't care. I would have married him in a parking lot if it meant we were building a life together. For the first few years, it felt like we were doing everything right. We lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment. We drove used cars. We budgeted, planned, sacrificed. I worked overtime whenever I could. Daniel talked constantly about climbing the ladder, about proving himself, about wanting more. Not just for him, but for us. I believed him. Then something shifted. It started subtly, the way most disasters do. Daniel began spending more time on his phone, scrolling, comparing, making offhand comments about people we went to school with who suddenly seemed to have everything. Lake houses, luxury cars, vacations that looked like magazine spreads. At first, I brushed it off. Everyone compares. Everyone wonders if they're falling behind. But the comments kept coming. When are we going to actually start living, Crystal? Do you ever feel like we're stuck while everyone else is moving forward? I tried to reassure him. I reminded him we were stable, that progress didn't always look flashy, that real security took time. He stopped listening. When Daniel landed a higher-paying job at a prestigious firm downtown, I thought it would calm him. Instead, it amplified everything. Suddenly, he was surrounded by people who treated money like oxygen, necessary, abundant, unquestioned. He started coming home late, networking dinners, client events, names I didn't recognize, places I wasn't invited. He grew distant, cold, dismissive. Our conversations shrank into logistics. Our intimacy disappeared entirely. He stopped wearing his wedding ring, claiming it didn't fit his professional image. When I suggested counseling, he laughed, like I'd told a bad joke. I told myself it was a phase, that marriage meant endurance, that love meant patience. Then one night, 7 months after his promotion, Daniel came home and asked me to sit down. I want a divorce. No anger, no tears, just a statement. He said he needed more, that he'd outgrown our marriage, that I was holding him back. And just like that, the life I thought we were building collapsed beneath my feet. I don't remember standing up from the couch after Daniel said the word divorce. I don't remember what I said next, or if I said anything at all. What I remember is the strange calm that washed over his face, as if he'd been rehearsing this moment for weeks, maybe months, and was finally relieved to get it over with. I remember how small the room suddenly felt, how the walls seemed to lean inward, while my chest hollowed out like something vital had been scooped from inside me. I asked him what was wrong. I asked him if I'd done something. I asked him if he wanted to try counseling or time apart or anything that didn't involve blowing up our entire life with a single sentence. He shook his head slowly, almost kindly, and said, "Crystal, I need more than this. I need more than you can give me." The way he said my name made it sound like a limitation, like I was a ceiling he'd finally decided to break through. For days afterward, I walked around in a fog, replaying every conversation from the past year, searching for the exact moment I should have realized he was already gone. Daniel moved through the apartment like a stranger, packing his things with methodical efficiency. No yelling, no guilt, no visible regret. He slept in the guest room until he found a place of his own, and during those weeks, the silence between us was louder than any fight we'd ever had. The truth didn't come out right away. It never does. At first, Daniel framed everything as personal growth, as ambition, as a need to find himself. I wanted to believe him because believing him meant there wasn't some deeper betrayal lurking underneath. But the truth has a way of surfacing, whether you're ready for it or not. I found out about her through a mutual acquaintance, a woman I barely spoke to who hesitated before telling me who kept saying, "I didn't know if you already knew, and I didn't want to be the one to hurt you." She'd seen Daniel at an upscale restaurant downtown holding hands with another woman like they were a couple who'd been together for years, laughing, leaning in close, comfortable in a way that doesn't happen overnight. When I confronted him, I was shaking. My voice barely sounded like my own. I asked him if there was someone else. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look ashamed. He just sighed like I was asking an inconvenient question and said he'd been meaning to tell me eventually. Her name, he explained, was Lauren. She worked in his industry. She understood his drive. She wanted the same things he did, things I apparently couldn't offer. "She makes me feel like I'm finally moving forward," he said, "not stuck." That word again, stuck. As if the years we'd spent building a life together were quicksand instead of a foundation. The divorce moved quickly after that. We didn't have children. We didn't own property. Just shared furniture, shared memories, and a shared history that suddenly felt meaningless. I let him take most of what we'd bought together, not because I was generous, but because I couldn't stand the idea of arguing over a dining table while my marriage disintegrated. I just wanted it to be over. I just wanted to stop hurting. Daniel moved in with Lauren almost immediately into a luxury apartment downtown that looked nothing like the life we'd planned together. Floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive art, views of a city skyline I'd never been invited to enjoy. I moved into a small one-bedroom on the other side of town and tried to convince myself that starting over was empowering instead of devastating. Those first months after the divorce were the darkest period of my life. I barely slept. Food tasted like cardboard. I replayed every insult I'd missed, every moment I'd chosen understanding over confrontation. My friends told me his choices weren't a reflection of my worth, but it was hard to internalize that when I felt so easily discarded, so effortlessly replaced. And replaced I was. Daniel and Lauren got engaged less than a year after our divorce was finalized. The photos popped up everywhere, sunsets, champagne captions about finding your forever. I stared at those images longer than I should have, not because I wanted him back, but because I needed to understand how someone could walk away from one life and step into another without ever looking back. Eventually, something inside me hardened, not in a bitter way, but in a protective one. I stopped checking his social media. I threw myself into my career. I learned how to exist without anchoring my value to someone else's choices. Slowly, painfully, I started to heal. I didn't know it then, but that healing would be tested in ways I never could have imagined. Because Daniel wasn't done with me yet. I just didn't know it. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, unevenly, like light seeping through a cracked door. Some days I woke up feeling almost normal, surprised by my own ability to breathe without pain. Other days, the grief hit me out of nowhere in the cereal aisle at the grocery store, or when I passed a restaurant Daniel and I used to love, or when I caught myself reaching for my phone to tell him something before remembering there was no him anymore. At first, I survived on autopilot. Work, sleep, repeat. I took on extra projects not because I was ambitious, but because being busy left less room for memories. I stayed late at the office, volunteered for assignments no one else wanted, and slowly earned a reputation for being reliable, sharp, and unshakable. My boss noticed. Promotions followed. Raises too. Each one felt less like a victory and more like proof that I hadn't been the weak link Daniel made me believe I was. I started going to the gym not obsessively, not to punish myself, but because movement helped quiet my mind. I reconnected with friends I'd unintentionally drifted from during my marriage. People who reminded me who I was before I'd spent years trying to be enough for someone else. Laughter returned in small doses. Confidence followed cautiously. Dating came later, casual at first. Coffee dates, conversations that didn't lead anywhere. I wasn't looking for love. I was relearning how to exist in the world as a woman who didn't need to be chosen to feel worthy. Some men were kind. Some were forgettable. A few reminded me exactly why I wasn't ready for anything serious, and that was okay. Meanwhile, Daniel's life, at least the version he curated, looked flawless. Engagement photos turned into wedding countdowns. Exotic vacations replaced the skyline views. designer clothes, champagne flutes, carefully staged smiles. I told myself I didn't care, and mostly that was true. But a small, quiet part of me still watched from a distance, not with longing, but with curiosity. I wanted to know if the life he'd traded me for actually made him happy. For a while, it seemed like it did. Then the tone shifted. The updates became less frequent. The captions lost their enthusiasm. Friends mentioned whispers, financial trouble, job instability, stress. Daniel married Lauren in a lavish destination wedding that looked more like a brand launch than a celebration of love. And not long after that, the rumors grew louder. Something about his company, something about mismanagement, something serious enough that even I heard about it without trying. I didn't follow closely. I had my own life by then, my own routines, my own peace. When I heard Daniel and Lauren were expecting a child, I felt nothing. No jealousy, no sadness, just distance. It surprised me, and I took it as a sign that I'd finally moved on. I didn't know then that moving on didn't mean moving past him forever. Sometimes it just means moving far enough away that the damage hurts less when it circles back. Because just when I believed that chapter was closed for good, just when my life felt stable, fulfilling, and entirely my own, Daniel showed up again. And he didn't come alone. The first time I heard that Daniel's life wasn't as perfect as it looked, I dismissed it as gossip. People love tearing down a glossy image, especially when it's been shoved in their faces for years. I told myself it didn't matter. Whatever chaos he was dealing with belonged to him now, not me. But the whispers kept coming. A former coworker mentioned seeing him at a much smaller firm, no longer the rising star he once bragged about being. A mutual friend said Lauren had quietly sold off some of her designer bags. Another hinted that the penthouse they'd once flaunted had been replaced by something far more modest. None of it was dramatic enough to feel satisfying. None of it gave me closure. It was just information, detached, dull. Then the news about the baby became real. Daniel and Lauren welcomed a son. Photos appeared, soft lighting, neutral tones, captions about blessings and new beginnings. I studied them once, then scrolled past. Whatever complicated emotions I'd expected never arrived. Instead, I felt an odd sense of relief. He had moved on completely, built a different life. That chapter finally was truly over, or so I thought. What I didn't see in those photos were the cracks forming behind the scenes. I didn't see the financial strain, the arguments, the resentment that creeps in. When a lifestyle built on appearances becomes impossible to maintain, I didn't see how quickly admiration can turn into blame when money dries up and stress takes its place. That part came later, much later. By then, I was busy living my own life, earning promotions, planning trips with friends, filling my weekends with things that brought me genuine joy instead of constant anxiety. I had grown into someone steadier, someone who trusted herself, someone who believed, finally, that love wasn't supposed to feel like a constant audition. Which is why when Daniel re-entered my life, it felt surreal, almost cinematic in its cruelty. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. No warning, no dramatic build-up, just the sound of my doorbell ringing as I stood in my kitchen, still wearing work clothes, debating dinner. I assumed it was a delivery driver or a neighbor. I opened the door without thinking. And there he was. Daniel looked older, thinner, worn down in a way that no filtered photo could hide. His confidence, the sharp edge he'd once carried like armor, was gone. In its place was exhaustion, desperation, and on his hip, a small boy with tear-streaked cheeks clung to his shirt, crying softly. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The past and present collided in that doorway, and I felt something inside me tighten, not with longing, but with alarm. "Crystal Daniel," said his voice cracking in a way I'd never heard before. "I need to talk to you, please." Every instinct I'd developed over the last 5 years screamed at me to shut the door, to protect the life I'd rebuilt so carefully. But curiosity and a lingering sense of humanity I hadn't quite learned to silence made me hesitate. I stepped aside, and that was the moment everything began to unravel. The moment Daniel stepped inside my apartment, the air felt different, thicker, heavier, like something unwanted had slipped in with him. The little boy on his hip had stopped crying, but clung tightly to Daniel's shirt. His small fingers curled like anchors. He couldn't have been more than 2 years old. Big eyes, red nose, confused, tired. Daniel glanced around my living room as if taking inventory. The clean lines, the new couch, the quiet order of a life that had clearly moved on without him. His eyes lingered just a second too long on the framed photo on the wall, me and two friends on a hiking trip, smiling, sunburned, alive. "Nice place," he said quietly. "You've done well." I didn't respond. Compliments from him felt invasive like fingerprints on glass. "Why are you here, Daniel?" I asked. "And how did you even find my address?" He shifted the child, his son, I reminded myself, trying to settle him down. I asked around. I didn't know where else to go. His voice wavered. "Everything fell apart, Crystal." That was the first crack in his story, the first emotional hook he cast like bait. He told me Lauren had left, that the money was gone, that the job never recovered, that the lifestyle he'd chased had evaporated the moment it stopped being convenient. According to him, she'd packed up and disappeared when things got hard, leaving him alone with a child he wasn't ready to raise on his own. "This is Oliver," he said softly, gesturing to the toddler. "He's my son." I nodded once. I wasn't going to touch that emotional landmine. "I lost the apartment," Daniel continued. "I'm working contract jobs now. Nothing stable. Childcare costs are insane. I'm barely keeping my head above water." He paused, watching my face, searching for sympathy. I gave him none. "I'm sorry you're struggling," I said evenly. "But I still don't understand why you're here." He looked at me, then really looked at me with an expression I recognized instantly. It was the same look he'd used years ago when he wanted something from me, but didn't want to admit it yet. The blend of vulnerability and calculation. "Because I realized something," he said. "I realized I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left you." There it was. "You were good to me," he went on quickly, as if afraid I'd interrupt. "You were stable. You cared. You didn't treat love like a transaction. Lauren never loved me the way you did. I was just useful to her. And when I stopped being useful, she was gone." I felt a slow, familiar anger rise in my chest, not explosive, not blinding. Cold. Controlled. "And you thought the appropriate response to that realization," I said carefully, "was to show up at my door, unannounced, with your child." He took a step closer. Instinctively, I stepped back. "We belonged together once," Daniel said. "We could again. I've changed, Crystal. I know what really matters now. Not money, not status. Family. Real love. You, me, and Oliver, we could be a family." The word family hung in the air like a bad smell. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It never came. "You can't be serious," I said finally. He started crying then, actual tears. The toddler watched me silently, as if sensing the tension. "I'm exhausted," Daniel said through sobs. "I'm barely surviving. Oliver deserves better than this. And I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking anyway." In that moment, clarity hit me like a wave. He wasn't here because he loved me. He was here because he needed someone to save him. And he thought I would. For a few seconds, I honestly wondered if I was mishearing him. If exhaustion or shock had twisted his words into something they weren't. I looked at Daniel's face, red, wet with tears, desperate, and waited for him to correct himself, to say he'd misspoken, to laugh nervously and admit this was all a misunderstanding. He didn't. "You want me to understand this correctly?" I said slowly, choosing each word with care. "You left our marriage because I wasn't enough for the life you wanted. You built a new life with another woman, had a child with her, and now that everything has collapsed, you think the solution is to come back here, to me." He nodded as if that logic were obvious, reasonable. "I was wrong back then," he said. "I see that now. You were the best thing in my life, and I didn't appreciate it until I lost it." I let out a short laugh, sharp, humorless. "You didn't lose me, Daniel. You discarded me." His expression tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he shifted Oliver on his hip, subtly repositioning him between us like a shield. Like leverage. "I know I hurt you," he said softly. "But people change. I've changed. I know what matters now." I folded my arms, grounding myself. "You know what matters now because your other options ran out." That landed. His jaw clenched. "You're being unfair," he said. "I'm asking for a second chance. For all of us." "All of us," I echoed. "You mean you want me to help raise the child you had with the woman you left me for?" He didn't deny it. The audacity of that suggestion of him standing in my living room, asking me to absorb the consequences of choices he made without a shred of concern for me, was staggering. 5 years ago, I might have doubted myself, might have wondered if refusing made me selfish, weak, cruel. Not now. "Daniel," I said quietly, "you don't want a second chance at love. You want stability. You want relief. You want someone to clean up the mess you made." "That's not fair." He snapped, his tears drying almost instantly. "You don't know what it's been like. You don't know how hard this is." "I know exactly how hard it is," I replied. "I lived through it when you left." He opened his mouth to argue, but I continued. You didn't want me when I was working overtime, supporting us, believing in a future you decided wasn't glamorous enough. You didn't care how much you hurt me. And now, because your fantasy fell apart, you expect me to step back into your life and play savior. He took another step toward me. I thought you'd understand. That's the problem, I said. You thought I'd accept being your backup plan. Silence stretched between us. Oliver whimpered softly, sensing the tension again. Daniel, I said firmly, you need to leave. His eyes widened in panic. Wait. Just hear me out. I know you're probably seeing someone. I'm not, I interrupted. But that doesn't matter. Even if I were single, lonely, and desperate, which I'm not, I would still say no. Anger replaced desperation on his face, fast and sharp. So that's it, he demanded. You're just going to turn your back on me, on a child. I walked to the door and opened it. This isn't me turning my back, I said. This is me choosing not to destroy myself to fix your life. For a moment, he looked like he might argue again. Then something ugly flashed across his expression. Resentment, entitlement, blame. You'll regret this, he said bitterly. When you're old and alone, you'll remember that I offered you a family. I met his gaze without flinching. No, I said. I'll remember that I finally chose myself. He left without another word, Oliver crying as the hallway swallowed them both. I closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. I stood in my entryway for a long time after Daniel left, listening to the echo of his footsteps fade down the hall. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't crying. What I felt instead was a strange, steady calm, like I'd just closed a door that had been rattling in the wind for years. I told myself it was over, that even Daniel would understand eventually how absurd his request had been. That illusion lasted exactly 2 days. The first message came the next morning. A long text, apologetic, rambling. He said he'd been emotional, that he hadn't explained himself properly, that stress and exhaustion had made him say things the wrong way. He insisted he wasn't trying to use me, that he genuinely believed we still had something special. I didn't respond. By that afternoon, there were 3 more messages, then a voicemail. His tone shifted, less apologetic, more desperate. He talked about how hard everything was, how he hadn't slept, how Oliver kept asking for his mother. He said he didn't know what to tell him. I still didn't respond. The next day, the messages changed again. This time, they were strategic. He sent photos of a cramped apartment I'd never seen before. Bare walls, a mattress on the floor, a toddler's toy shoved into a corner. This is what we're living with now, he wrote. I never wanted this for my son. Another message followed minutes later. You always had such a good heart, Crystal. I know you don't want to see a child suffer. That was when it stopped feeling sad and started feeling deliberate. I blocked his number. That should have been the end of it. But Daniel had always been good at outsourcing pressure when it suited him. 3 days later, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. Finally, curiosity and a growing sense of unease made me answer. Crystal, a woman's voice, said sharply, "This is Margaret Daniel's mother." My stomach tightened. She and I had never been close. During my marriage, she'd been polite, but distant, always finding subtle ways to suggest Daniel could have done better. Someone more ambitious, more impressive. I don't think this is appropriate, I said carefully. Oh, I think it is, she replied. Daniel came to you for help, and you slammed the door in his face. That's not what happened. Don't play games with me, she snapped. My son is struggling. He has a child to care for. And you, who know exactly what kind of man he is, refuse to help him. I felt my jaw clench. Daniel's struggles are not my responsibility. He made his choices. Her voice hardened. So you're just going to be bitter forever. You're going to punish him because he moved on. I moved on too, I said evenly. That's the difference. She scoffed. He's offering you a family, Crystal, a ready-made one. Do you know how many women your age would jump at that opportunity? I almost laughed. Almost. I'm not discussing this, I said. Please don't call me again. I hung up and blocked her number. My hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer entitlement of it all. The idea that I owed them something. That I was cruel for refusing to clean up the aftermath of Daniel's decisions. That night, a friend sent me a screenshot. Daniel had posted on social media. The post was long, emotional, carefully written to frame him as a broken, single father, abandoned by everyone who'd ever claimed to love him. He didn't name me, but he didn't have to. Anyone who knew us even vaguely could connect the dots. He wrote about reaching out to someone from his past, hoping for compassion, only to be met with rejection. About how pride and bitterness had won over kindness. about how his child deserved better than the world was giving him. The comments were brutal. Some people offered sympathy. Others praised his strength. A few went further, condemning the unnamed woman who'd supposedly turned her back on a struggling father and child. I saw words like heartless, cold, selfish. My phone started buzzing with messages. Some friends checked in to ask if I was okay. Others, people I barely spoke to anymore, asked pointed questions about what had happened. I didn't defend myself publicly. I didn't comment. I didn't explain. Instead, I took screenshots. Every post, every comment, every message. I saved them all in a folder on my laptop, something my instincts told me I might need later. Because this wasn't just emotional fallout anymore. This was a campaign. And something told me Daniel wasn't anywhere near finished. The silence that followed Daniel's post was worse than the noise. For 2 days, nothing happened. No messages, no calls, no new social media updates. It was almost peaceful, and that was what unsettled me. Daniel had never been someone who accepted rejection quietly. He escalated. He always had. On the third morning, I was halfway through my commute when my phone buzzed with a message from a coworker. "Hey, just a heads up. There's a man in the lobby asking for you by name." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "What does he look like?" I typed back, even though I already knew the answer. "A little frantic, says it's urgent." By the time I arrived at the office, my pulse was steady but cold. I didn't feel scared. I felt angry in a way that was sharp and focused. Daniel showing up at my home had been inappropriate. Showing up at my workplace was something else entirely. I found him pacing near the reception desk, dressed in clothes that looked hastily thrown on dark circles carved into his face. He looked smaller here, stripped of the emotional leverage he'd tried to wield in my apartment. "Crystal," he said, when he saw me, relief flooding his features. "Thank God. You have to talk to me." "This is not okay," I said immediately, keeping my voice low but firm. "You need to leave." I tried calling, he said, ignoring my words. "You blocked me. I didn't know what else to do." "That doesn't give you the right to come here," I snapped. "You're crossing a line." A few people glanced in our direction. I felt heat rise in my chest, not embarrassment, but fury. This was my space, my career, the one thing he'd never been able to take from me. "Just 5 minutes," he pleaded. "Please, I'm desperate." "You should have thought about that before you made this public," I said, "before you dragged my name through the mud." His expression hardened. "I didn't mention you." "You didn't have to," I replied. "Now leave or I'm calling security." That was when the mask slipped completely. "Fine," he said sharply. "You want the truth. I need help. I need money. Rent is due. Childcare is killing me. I know you're doing well now. I've seen it. I'm not asking for much. Just enough to get us through a few months." There it was. The core of everything he'd done since showing up at my door. "No," I said without hesitation. His eyes darkened. "You'd really let a child suffer just to prove a point." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Your child is not my responsibility. His mother is in his life. And if you're struggling, there are legal and social resources available to you. I am not one of them." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then his lips curled into something bitter. "You might want to rethink this," he said, "because I could make things very uncomfortable for you." A chill ran down my spine, not from fear, but from recognition. This wasn't desperation anymore. This was a threat. "Are you threatening me?" I asked quietly. He crossed his arms. "I'm just saying, people talk. Employers care about reputation. It would be a shame if the wrong version of this story got around." That was it. I pulled out my phone and turned away from him. "I'm calling security," I said. "And if you ever show up here again, I will file for a restraining order. Do you understand?" For a second, I thought he might explode, but instead something in him deflated. The confidence drained from his face, replaced by something smaller, weaker. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. "You'll regret this." "I already made the mistake," I said, meeting his gaze one last time. 5 years ago. Security escorted him out minutes later. I watched from a distance as he was led toward the exit, shoulders slumped, the performance finally over. My supervisor checked in, concern etched on her face. I told her it was a personal matter being handled legally. That afternoon, I left work early and sat in my apartment staring at the wall, my mind racing, not with doubt, but with calculation. Daniel wasn't going to stop on his own. That much was clear. I picked up my phone and called my sister Claire, a family law attorney. "I need advice," I said the moment she answered, "and I need it now." Because this had officially gone from uncomfortable to dangerous. Claire didn't interrupt me once while I told her everything. Not when I described Daniel showing up at my apartment with his son. Not when I told her about the text, the social media post, his mother's phone call, or the way he'd stood in my workplace lobby and tried to corner me into giving him money. She listened in complete silence, the way she always did when she was already mentally building a case. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "Crystal," she said, "this isn't just messy. This is harassment, and it's escalating." I rubbed my temples, suddenly aware of how exhausted I felt. I know. I didn't expect him to go this far. "People who feel entitled rarely stop when they hear no," Claire replied. "They stop when they're forced to." She told me to document everything: screenshots, timestamps, call logs, messages from third parties. I'd already done most of it instinctively, which earned a quiet note of approval. Then she paused, as if weighing whether to say something else. "There's one more thing," she said carefully. "And I don't want you to jump to conclusions, but something about his story doesn't add up." "What do you mean?" "You said he told you the child's mother abandoned them completely," Claire continued. "That's a very specific claim. If it's not true, and if he's using it to manipulate you, that matters. A lot. I hadn't considered that. Not fully. I'd been so focused on Daniel's behavior toward me that I hadn't questioned the foundation of the story he'd built. I'd taken his version at face value because part of me still assumed he wouldn't lie about something that serious. I was wrong. 2 days later, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer. After everything that had happened, unknown calls made my stomach tighten. But something about this one felt different. Quieter. Hesitant. "Hello," I said. There was a pause. Then a woman's voice. Calm. Controlled. Tired in a way that suggested long-term exhaustion rather than temporary panic. "Is this Crystal?" she asked. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Lauren," she said. "I'm Daniel's ex-wife. And I think we need to talk." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Of all the people I expected to hear from, she was not one of them. The woman Daniel had left me for. The woman I'd spent years trying not to resent. The woman who, according to his story, had abandoned him and their child without a second thought. "That's not what Daniel told me," I said cautiously. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "I'm sure it's not." We agreed to meet the next afternoon at a cafe across town, a neutral public place. I arrived early, nerves tight but steady. When Lauren walked in, I barely recognized her from the polished images I remembered. She looked thinner, more subdued, like someone who had learned the hard way that fantasy collapses faster than you expect. She didn't waste time. "Daniel is lying to you," she said as soon as we sat down. "About almost everything." She told me the truth in pieces, each one dismantling another part of the narrative Daniel had fed me. He hadn't been abandoned. She had left him. After years of emotional manipulation, after financial chaos he'd hidden until it was too late. After discovering he'd been pressuring her for money she didn't have while telling everyone else she was the problem. "I didn't walk away from my son," Lauren said firmly. "I share custody. I pay support. I see him regularly. Daniel knows that." She slid her phone across the table, scrolling through messages, requests to see their child ignored or delayed unless money was involved. Bank statements showing consistent payments. Court documents outlining their custody arrangement. My hands went cold as I read. "He's been telling people I abandoned them," she continued, "that I ran when things got hard. It's easier than admitting he can't manage his own life without blaming someone else." A familiar anger rose in my chest, sharper now, because it was accompanied by clarity. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked quietly. Lauren met my eyes. "Because he mentioned you. Said you were his backup plan. That if you didn't come around, he'd make you help one way or another." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't think it was fair for you to be dragged into this without knowing the truth." The room felt suddenly too small. Everything clicked into place. The manipulation, the guilt trips, the public smear campaign. The way he'd framed himself as the abandoned, heroic single parent while quietly rewriting reality to suit his needs. Daniel hadn't come back because he'd changed. He'd come back because he needed a new target. And now finally I could see him clearly. By the time I left the cafe, my hands had stopped shaking, but my resolve hadn't softened. If anything, it had crystallized. There was a clean, sharp clarity that came from finally seeing the full picture, not the version Daniel had sold me, not the one he'd blasted across social media, but the truth documented and undeniable. That night, I spread everything out on my dining table like evidence from a crime scene. Screenshots of his texts, voicemails, the post, the comments, the call log from his mother, notes from my sister, and now Lauren's messages, bank statements, custody documents. Every lie he'd told had left a paper trail. All I had to do was follow it. Claire filed for a restraining order the next morning. The waiting was the worst part. Not because I doubted the outcome, but because silence had become suspicious. Every unexpected sound outside my apartment made my stomach tighten. Every unknown number felt like a prelude. Daniel didn't contact me again. No messages, no calls, no new posts. That quiet felt strategic, like the pause before a storm. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I took the day off work and arrived early. Sitting on a hard wooden bench outside the courtroom with my hands folded in my lap, breathing slowly. When Daniel walked in, my chest tightened despite myself. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him, unshaven, hollow-eyed, clutching a folder like a shield. Oliver wasn't with him this time, and I felt a complicated mix of relief and anger at the thought of a child being used as a prop. When he saw me, he started toward me immediately. "Crystal, please," he said, voice cracking. "We can talk. We don't need to do this." Claire placed a hand on my arm, a silent reminder. I didn't respond. I didn't look at him. I walked past and took my seat. Inside the courtroom, everything felt stripped of emotion. No dramatics, no performances that mattered. Just facts. Claire presented our evidence calmly, methodically, laying out the pattern. The uninvited visit to my home, the barrage of messages, the public smear, the appearance at my workplace, the explicit financial demand, the implied threat to my reputation. Then she presented Lauren's documentation proof that Daniel's story about abandonment and destitution was false. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he tried to cry. He talked about stress, about being overwhelmed, about how he'd only reached out because he thought I'd understand him better than anyone else. He said he never meant to scare me, never meant to harass me. He said he was just a father trying to survive. The judge listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, she leaned forward slightly and spoke with a calm that cut sharper than anger. "Mr. Fryer," she said, "nothing in the evidence presented supports your claim that Ms. Fryer has any obligation, legal or otherwise, to assist you. You were divorced 5 years ago. You remarried. You have a child with another woman who, according to court documents, is actively involved in that child's life and provides support. Your repeated attempts to contact Ms. Fryer, particularly appearing at her residence and place of employment, constitute harassment." Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but the judge raised a hand. "I am granting the restraining order," she continued. "You are to have no contact with Ms. Fryer, directly or indirectly. You are to stay at least 500 feet away from her home and workplace. Any violation will result in immediate legal consequences. Do you understand?" Daniel nodded, shoulders slumping the performance, finally collapsing under the weight of reality. When it was over, I felt something lift inside me. Not joy, not triumph, but relief. A deep bone-level relief that came from knowing there were boundaries now. Enforced ones. Real ones. As we left the courtroom, Daniel didn't look at me. He walked away without another word, smaller than I remembered him ever being. Claire squeezed my shoulder. "You did exactly what you needed to do," she said. "You protected yourself." For the first time since he'd shown up at my door, I believed it was true. Life didn't magically become perfect after the restraining order. It didn't need to. What it became was quiet, the kind of quiet that lets you breathe again without bracing for impact. Days passed without my phone lighting up unexpectedly. Weeks went by without wondering if someone would be waiting outside my door. Slowly, my nervous system stopped treating every silence as a warning. Daniel disappeared from my world completely. Friends told me his social media posts vanished not long after the hearing. Whether he deleted them himself or they were reported enough times to be taken down, I never found out, and I didn't care. What mattered was that his voice no longer reached me. His version of the story no longer demanded space in my head. I poured that reclaimed energy into my life. Work thrived. A promotion my manager had been hinting at for months that finally came through, bringing my salary to a level that would have seemed unimaginable during the years I'd spent trying to convince Daniel that we were doing fine. I traveled more, laughed more, trusted my instincts again. And then, without forcing it, I met Michael. He wasn't flashy. He didn't lead with ambition or status. He listened. He asked questions. He had his own career, his own goals, and he never made me feel like love was something I had to earn by shrinking myself. I told him about my past when I was ready, and he didn't flinch. He didn't see a woman with baggage. He saw someone who had survived something hard and come out stronger. That mattered more than he probably ever realized. Months later, I ran into Lauren by chance at a grocery store. She was with Oliver, who looked healthy, happy, oblivious to the chaos that had surrounded him early in life. We exchanged a brief, quiet nod, nothing more. There was no animosity left to process, just shared understanding and a mutual desire to keep moving forward. Time did what time does. It softened the edges. It turned something that once consumed my thoughts into a closed chapter I could acknowledge without reopening. Nearly 2 years after Daniel showed up at my door, with desperation in his eyes and entitlement in his voice, I could finally look back without anger. I understood something then that I hadn't before. The woman I was during my marriage would have felt guilty. She would have questioned herself. She might have considered helping him, even knowing it was wrong, just to prove she was still kind, still worthy, still good. The woman I am now knows that self-respect is not cruelty. Closing the door on Daniel that night and ordering pizza instead of collapsing under guilt wasn't petty. It was survival. Every decision after that, from ignoring his messages to filing for legal protection, was an extension of that same choice to stop setting myself on fire to keep someone else warm. Some people come back into your life not because they belong there, but to test how much you've grown. When Daniel returned, he expected the version of me he'd left behind uncertain, accommodating, desperate to be chosen. Instead, he found someone who knew her worth and refused to be used as a safety net for someone else's poor decisions. And that's the ending he never anticipated.